The fingerprints shall be forwarded to Georgia Crime Information Center, where an identification number shall be assigned to the fingerprints for use in detecting any future violations by the same offender, and that may actually work. And that would be a pretty close guess, Mr. Chairman, if the committee saw fit. I'm sorry I missed the first part of the conversation.
We're just glad to have you here now. Representative Setzler wants to weigh in on this.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify what I'm hearing Representative Lunsford say. Are you suggesting that at the scene of the stop that happened?
I think that if a municipality or a political, I'm sorry, I'm not. Is it okay if I answer, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. I'm assuming that we all believe in local control, and a political subdivision within this state can make many of their own law enforcement decisions, and apparently do every day. So if a political subdivision chooses to issue citations and release them, then they may not have the equipment or wherewithal to do that. But if that political subdivision chooses to bring them in and arrest them, fingerprint them, and then release them, or if we mandate that occur when they have no driver's license, then absolutely yes, to your question, they would be, if they have no driver's license, no proof that they even should be having it, then if they are arrested, fingerprint them, establish an identification number on the fingerprint, and send it to GCIC. Yes, sir. That is what I'm suggesting.
And, Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked the question is, I mean, although I can see some, in the case of a good number of arrests, I can see great value in that. I can also see a case where, a soccer mom runs kids to a ball game and gets pulled over for improper lane change, and, oh my gosh, don't have my driver's license with me. Well, this is an unlicensed driver to the cop making the stop. Now, in Senator Wiles' remedy, all she has to do is bring her driver's license in when she goes to court and say, see, I've had this driver's license, I'm good to go. But if in Representative Lunsford's circumstance, if procedurally we were to mandate that anyone that was stopped without a driver's license is printed or taken in or arrested, then what we've got is soccer mom running her kids to a ball game that, oh my gosh, I don't have my license with me, being booked down at the station. And, literally I've got my campaign manager, his wife was stopped. Actually, she was hit on 75 by someone else that was driving. She didn't have her license on her. And she said, the officer told her she had 15 minutes to get a friend there to pick her daughter up, or DFAX was coming to take her child away. And her kid was going to spend the night with DFAX while she was going down to the station. And frankly, there was just an issue with, oh my gosh, where's my driver's license? So I just want to be cautious about what we're doing with respect to, and I don't disagree with the spirit of what you're trying to do. I just want to make sure we've thought through the cases of people that don't happen to have their driver's license with them. I think Senator Wiles' remedy addresses that. I don't want to have everyone who doesn't happen to have a license on them to be booked and fingerprinted down at the station, and all the complications that come with that necessarily.
If I could follow up, Mr. Chair, I wasn't changing their method of what they do at a local jurisdiction or political subdivision. So if that political subdivision in your scenario, that would have occurred anyway. That had no bearing on the fingerprint. In other words, if she was going to be arrested under Georgia law, she'd be fingerprinted anyway. So that wouldn't have changed that scenario one iota.
But there's no mandate under Georgia law that she be arrested.
Correct. And I wasn't necessarily suggesting that we mandate it. I don't think that it's suggesting his bill that the mandate be arrested. But I think that if we're going to spend the time and the money to run their fingerprints, we ought to establish an identification number on them and send them GCIC. Now, with all due respect to Senator Wiles, who's a friend of mine, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how the executive branch is going to view that. And I'm not sure that every action of this committee or the House or Senate in a whole is always concerned with that final outcome. I know we've went off the reservation more than once over my career here. But maybe it would behoove us to check with them and see how they felt on a person who was arrested and who was fingerprinted. If they had a problem, if we could figure out a cheap and economical method of attaching an identification number to it to retain those prints.
I could just respond very briefly. I think you missed. We are going to offer, the committee is going to offer an amendment that Representative Golick had, which says upon conviction, all the identifying information has to be sent to DDS. That's his House Bill 1288.
Yes, sir, but DDS wouldn't have any information on a person who never had a driver's license.
Well, but they're going to send the name and the finger, because you're being fingerprinted on your first offense. You're right, we're not capturing that first-time person, but after you've been convicted, your driver's license, your name, your fingerprints will all go to DDS, and then they will have a way of identifying you, so the second time through, they'll have your fingerprints. That's what the amendment will do.
Representative Bearden had an answer for a question a few minutes ago. Do you still want to be recognized?
On the Representative Setzler's comment, if the soccer mom has a valid license, a simple name and date of birth can be ran by the law enforcement officer, because your name and date of birth is on the license. That would come back valid or whatever with all the information on that license. To get to Representative Lunsford's question about fingerprinting, when you're driving without a license on person, which is I think still a $10 fine. I don't even think it shows up. It's just a $10 fine.
I don't think it has any add-ons either.
You just or show your license, you probably don't get nothing. But if you're driving without a license, maybe just change the bill to their fingerprint at that time. Because from the agencies I worked at, if we took someone to jail, even for that cash bond, they were always fingerprinted, and we did arrest book-in because they were in our facilities, and that way we had the fingerprints on file. So I don't know if that helps, Representative Lunsford.
Mr. Chair, I was just offering it for discussion, sir.
I like what you're doing because it's a very good idea on it. So,
All right, thank you. Representative Levitas.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with all due respect for the Attorney General, and I do have great respect for him, we're the policy setters, not the Attorney General's office. They're supposed to carry out the policies that we set. And I do think it's a problem. I really don't see how, and I respect Representative Setzler's comments. The problem is, if I give you a name, John Doe, and here's my license, which could be passed around the community, the problem is we will never capture that person. If that person doesn't show up under the false name, they're lost to the system. So I think what Representative Lunsford's getting at is a good solution. The question is, can we work it out today? I don't want to hold up what I think is a good bill, but I do think the problem is it's a great solution if we're able to capture that person. I don't know how we capture that person if we wait until conviction. I don't want the soccer mom or Representative Lunsford arrested when he forgets his license, or anybody else. But I don't know how we capture that information unless we fingerprint them before conviction. If they don't show up, and I'd ask if the chairman would indulge me, I'd ask Prosecutor Spahas to comment. How would you deal with somebody who just gives a false name, never shows up? How would we ever capture that person's information and know whether they had been ticketed for driving without ever having been licensed?
Without maintaining a record of this stuff, I don't ever see anybody getting tried for this felony that's in this bill. I mean, without maintaining that. What Representative Lunsford has discussed is actually in place in the GCIC database, where a state identification number gets issued when you are fingerprinted, regardless of your driver's license. That's how we track other criminal offenses. You get fingerprinted now at the time of arrest for shoplifting, less than an ounce of marijuana, other misdemeanors. So one of the ways to do it would be to say, if arrested, fingerprint, like you do in these other cases. And we've discussed how to deal with it administratively, that maybe it needs to be changed, but that would be a practical way to do it. If an arrest is made during the booking process, you just fingerprint them like you do most other serious misdemeanors. So that would be the procedural way to do it. It's in place. But giving it to DDS is not going to solve the problem, because they don't have any means of tracking by fingerprints and SID numbers. And I can give you some horror stories about people that we have found using different names 2 or 3 times, and we finally catch it up and have to go get fingerprints from other agencies and compare them and that kind of thing. But that's the practical way to deal with it.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up with one? And this would actually be a comment for somebody who's been on the front lines, Representative Bearden. If you stop that soccer mom, or you stop somebody that you may think, I mean, practically speaking, are people allowed to give an opportunity to say, hey, I don't have my license on me, here's some other identifying information, my registration, my insurance card. How do you deal with that on the streets? In other words, is the situation of soccer moms or the average citizen getting arrested, if they're able to produce some kind of identification, really a problem?
No. I mean, when I prosecuted, no, because if you give your name and you give a driver's license, I mean, you give your date of birth, they run you in if you come back with a valid license, and arresting people for not having the valid license on the person, it's not a crime. It's it's not an arrestable offense. Actually, it's no license on the persons is the offense.
And I guess for me the question becomes: do we trust our law enforcement? Obviously, you're going to know my bias. I do trust law enforcement to make those decisions on the streets every day, like they do, whether to issue a citation at all for the offense, to determine whether or not this is a person who we need to get further information from.
If I could respond, I do, because a lot of people don't realize, especially people not have been involved in law enforcement, almost every single traffic offense that you stop people for is an arrestable offense. There are a lot of them that are 12-month misdemeanors, but the officers make those discretionary calls right there. They make a decision, and what we're saying is we want to identify you. And I agree, and if I can get the Attorney General to come along with me, I don't have a problem with Representative Lunsford's idea. I think it's a good idea to fingerprint people. I think it's a good idea to send it to the GCIC. In fact, in Cherokee County, a state court judge told me that they had a fellow come in and he was pleading DUI, no contender, and the judge looked at him and said, "I've seen you here before. Go run his fingerprints." And it was his 4th DUI. But he was pleading because he didn't have a driver's record. They couldn't run his driving record on the computer, which is what he would do. He would run it on his computer. And I had another judge say they caught somebody because he used the same alias as he'd used the first time, and this was the 5th time. And once they ran it all together, he just forgot that he'd used the alias the first time. He just got so. I mean, that's a sad comment, but yeah, it's a real problem. But first we got to deal with the bleeding. First you got to make it so everybody knows you're going to go to jail if you do this. And then then the second part is working through all the details of how we enhance the penalty on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th offense. Remember, right now it's a slap on the wrist. Most people are dealt with citations. And I realize I'd love to have the global solution, and maybe we can come up with it, but we got to stop the bleeding first. And believe me, when you listen to the witnesses that are going to testify, the message is out. And actually, on the websites, my bill is listed as "Drive without a license, go to jail." On some of because I get the emails about it, and that's exactly the message I want everybody to have. Drive without a license, go to jail. My goal would be there would be no second offenders. Lord knows no 3rd or 4th. You just don't drive unless you have a license. I commend y'all for trying to find a solution. I couldn't find it last year, and in fact ran into opposition from the executive. That was one of the other underlying reasons not stated in his veto message that he vetoed the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, Representative Beard and I have spoken. I think I'm comfortable there are controls to the author. I'm comfortable there's controls in place for licensed people who don't have their license on their person. I think I was overreacting a little bit. Would you welcome an amendment to this that would provide provisions that, to the concern of the solicitors, that someone that was stopped not just be released so that they never come back to court and there's no way to provide accountability?
I would welcome that if I could find a way to make sure this becomes law. And I'm just being as honest as I can. This was one of the objections that the executive raised. I went and worked with him because I did not have I had a very slim majority in the House, and I got his approval from his staff, and they drafted this bill. And if it's not everything, it is a bill that I'm assured, if it reaches his desk, will become law. And once you listen to the witnesses who have been harmed by people driving without a license, you'll understand my concern. I want a bill that becomes law. And
you're saying that municipalities can do that, they can opt to do what we've been talking about anyway.
Absolutely. I think if you what you need to do is you need to go back, and like I said, City of Marietta, they have very clearly decided if they cannot prove that you have a license, they're going to take you to jail. They're going to fingerprint you and create a criminal record for you. And I think the real solution, I mean, it's already the law. But I do, Mr. Chairman, I do have a witness. She needs to get back to her children. So if she could testify, I would really appreciate the indulgence of the committee.
Any further questions of the author from members of the committee? Okay. Chairman Wiles, we take witnesses in the order that they have signed up. If anyone wants to defer, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr.
D.A. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would happily go number 2 if I may let Mrs. Malegny go first. May I do that, please?
You may.
Thank you.
Ms. Stacy Malegny.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and other committee members. There's some members here today that have heard my speech probably before, and I think I probably speak for the majority of people harmed out there by persons who do not have a license at the time that their family member was killed or maimed. And the burden that's put on that family is tremendous. Not only emotionally, but financially. And I'll keep telling this story over and over again if it's going to help. And it's been 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days since my heart has been broken. I recall Dominic's, the day he entered my life. Every woman's dream, a son to hold, nurture, and protect. And little did I know the protection part was out of my control. The love within him was unlike anyone I had ever known. He did so without forethought. It was gentle, it was real, and it was true. And I felt it, and I endeared him each valuable day I was given. My thoughts are often of my family on that fateful day. My mother-in-law was driving, and she was carrying my 2 children in the back. She's unaware of the careless driver following from behind. He's still absorbed with alcohol from his sleepless night before, and he's talking to his friend beside him. His eyes struggle to see the road as he tries to make his turn, and he cannot do it. His front tires are split while pieces of cement are thrown, and he is sent into the side of my loved ones. The driver is driving without a license, never having ever had a license. And in addition, or a driver's class for that matter. He was 18 years old. In addition to being 3 times over the legal limit for the consumption of alcohol. I now picture my son's blood and broken bones and his beautiful face left perfectly intact, and perhaps this was my chance to see his face one last time before I said goodbye. At least I was given that. He is still strapped in his car seat. I see him. His Spider-Man shoes he loved so much are still on his feet, and he's clutching his store bag and toys. I want desperately to take his hand and tell him how much I love him as his still little body sits there. Do you see him? Perhaps there's hope, though. Maybe God took him before the back of his head was laid open with the weapon of the vehicle's deadly side view mirror. And I'm forever tortured with the thought of Dominic's lifeless body as he lies on the cold steel table at the morgue. The white towel soaked in his blood covering the back of the deadly wounds around his head. With this, it's apparent why our daughter was the only one that was brought to our door that day. There will be no more birthdays for him. He had turned 5, and he's now forever frozen in time. And as for my mother-in-law, the crash was so violent that her seatbelt has cut into her body. It will take 3 weeks and 5 surgeries, but to no avail. We are soon forced to turn off her life support and watch in agony as her misery finally comes to an end. There's not a day that goes by that I don't picture the violence of this crash. In fact, I suppose I probably torture myself each day when I get into my car and I think of them and what they had to endure that day. My daughter watching as my son dies next to her, having to climb out of the car over his dead body, never ever having to say ever being able to say goodbye to her grandmother that she loved so much. Never saw her in the hospital, never got a chance to see her one last time. I wonder why I torture myself this way. It was probably because I wasn't there to bear witness, maybe. But it's easy if you try to see them as they were and what became of them and how it has affected my family's life. A husband living each painful day without his only son. A daughter playing without her brother, and I looking on at this family in the face of tragedy. And somehow that's almost worse for me, watching my own family live this tragedy. We are forever and will be changed. I'd like for you to know it's for my beautiful son that I'm no longer afraid of dying, though. I secretly long for that day to come in order to see his face once more. There's not one day that goes by that I don't fight the tears and the deafening agony of my heart overflowing into my head. I try extremely hard not to let it consume me, and it's a constant struggle for me to feel any happiness at all. What's worse is that this is how I'm supposed to live the rest of my life. A life without him. A life without my son. He died on a busy Atlanta road at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, November 7th, 2004. He was hit by a young man of just 18, Alejandro Moreno, an illegal immigrant from Mexico. He is now serving out his 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Not only is he in jail because of poor judgment and failed guidance by his parents, it is my opinion that the state of Georgia played a role in the circumstances of my loved one's death. My son and mother-in-law died a tragic, painful, and horrible death that certainly could have been prevented. I ask you respectfully to be an ambassador for this child and remember him. When you vote on this bill, and I am putting his memory in your hands, along with my mother, the memory of my mother-in-law. I spoke about not only the emotional aspect of this and what our families had to endure. As the first year progressed, first finding out that this was a teen, I almost felt that, okay, maybe this was an accident, a true accident. Okay, then we find out he was 3 times over the legal limit. And then it's no sleep. He had no sleep all night long. So one added on top of the other. Then to find out that he had never, ever had so much as any type of schooling whatsoever on how to drive an automobile. And therefore, having no license. The parents condoned it. It was a family car, not even in their name. It was in somebody else's name, and thank goodness we closed that loophole. But, $10,000 a day is what it costed for my mother-in-law to lie in the intensive care at the hospital. It was $7,000 for the helicopter ride there. And who's going to pay for all this? Who? And it's not just my family having to endure these things. As I said, I really feel that there's many others out there, but just don't have what it takes to come forward and tell their story. They're living their lives the best they can in their own misery, and they probably don't even think it would make a difference if they came here. I don't feel that way. I think all of you really do care about the citizens of this state. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here doing what you do every day, day in and day out, and hearing stories like mine. I do think that this is a safety issue. Anyone, not even just an illegal immigrant, should be held accountable if they're caught without ever having had a driver's license. Something definitely needs to be done. I believe in this bill, and I thank the author for bringing it up. And whatever it takes to make it work. I think that's what needs to be done. Something needs to be done. My son could not have, I look at it as he was a sacrifice for this person to get from point A to point B. That's what it boils down to, point A to point B. He could have taken a bus. He could have gotten a ride from another friend or another parent who had a license. There's other avenues that these people can go down to get from point A to point B. And how many other people are going to have to get injured and killed and go through this misery and agony day in and day out for the rest of their life just so these people can get from point A to point B? It just can't happen anymore. It just can't. And I'll take questions. I'd be willing and able to help any way I can.
Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Malegny.
I appreciate it.
You have a question from Representative Lunsford.
Yes, ma'am. By the way, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea whether that young man had ever been pulled over before in a traffic citation? Did he ever admit that?
No.
By the
I
way,
don't.
just so you understand what I'm trying to do on the bill, is I want to make sure that upon the second time them ever being pulled over before a tragedy happens that occurred in your family, that we have them, we fingerprinted them, and we arrest them.
Absolutely.
So instead of the third strike they're out, this will be the second strike they're out. So this is to tighten up the bill, not to loosen it.
Right.
And I do appreciate Senator Wiles, and he's a very good attorney. And I think we've worked out some language that won't cost him a veto, but at the same time will accomplish what we're trying to do and save children of the future like yours. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malegny.
Thank you. I appreciate
Any further questions of Ms. Malegny? And we so appreciate your being here. I know it was difficult. Mr. King.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is D.A. King. I am president of the Dustin Inman Society. We are a nonprofit coalition of citizens and real legal immigrants who are dedicated to educating the public on the consequences of illegal immigration. I do study illegal immigration, but I am here in support of this bill, and it doesn't take an expert on illegal immigration, I don't think, to point out the very clear public safety benefits to our keeping track of and making penalties consequential for people who have chosen to disobey our laws, to obey our rule of law, and to operate a motor vehicle on the public highways here in Georgia without ever having taken the training or gone through the licensing process. Having driven all around Georgia for 25 years as an insurance agent, I used to do 200, sometimes 350 miles a day. Driving in metro Atlanta by itself is an adventure, and I can't imagine that people are doing so without ever having had the training. So I'm here in support of the bill. I respectfully, I mean no offense when I say it, but I consider this a no-brainer. What we're trying to do with the bill is to make the penalty such that people will actually find the consequences for ignoring our motor vehicle laws and our driver's licenses laws such that they will think twice about doing it. I was in support of the bill last year. I sat in this very room and listened to much the same discussions and arguments. The resistance to this bill came from people who defend, support, and make their money from the organized crime of illegal immigration. The huge and vast majority of people who drive in this state and in this country without ever having obtained a operator's license are people who are in this country illegally, either entered the country illegally or remained beyond their visa time. Those people are accurately called by the federal government illegal aliens. I discourage the use of the term illegal immigrants because immigrants, by definition, join the American family lawfully. There is no other definition other than an alien who has been granted lawful permanent residence. So I'm familiar with the arguments that you are going to hear urging you to vote no on this. If it's like last year, they will include the fact that a possible felony for driving without ever having obtained a driver's license is cruel and unusual punishment, that maybe the punishment does not fit the crime. I hope when that argument comes up that everyone will remember Mrs. Malegny that just got out of this chair. I run a website called the Dustin Inman Society. On that website we have a page called No More Deaths, and it is a page of names of people who were killed in this country by people in this country illegally. Sadly, my webmaster and I have difficulty keeping up with posting the names, and we only post the names of people for whom we can provide a link to a news story. My point is this: the federal government is not securing our borders or equally applying our laws. Nobody I know can blame anybody for wanting to live and work in the United States. We can blame our federal government for not securing our borders. You have an opportunity here to close one of the holes and protect the public from people who are being let through our insecure borders. I hope that you will take it. You're going to hear probably that this will interfere with the right to drive. And I would respectfully remind everybody concerned, there is no right to drive. It is a licensed, controlled, regulated privilege. You're going to hear that somehow this will, and I heard this last year, this will prevent families from driving their children to school or to the hospital, thereby depriving them of their education and medical care. Sometimes it's difficult to keep a straight face with some of the arguments that come up for not voting for bills like this. But what we're after here, I hope, is an equal application of the existing laws. And lastly, I have to go to another committee, but you're going to hear that this will somehow target or profile immigrants. And again, I would remind everyone respectfully, my adopted sister is an immigrant. I would remind everyone that immigrants are here in this country lawfully. And if you have trouble deciding the difference between an immigrant and an illegal alien, please remember a very, very easy rule to discern the difference. Immigrants do not require amnesty. Again, I hope that you will pass this bill. I would agree with the fact that if we don't find a way to capture the fingerprints and the true identity of a first offender, this bill will not be as efficient and effective as it could be. But I hope we put it in place in whatever form it takes to get it passed into law, on the concept that it would provide a foundation upon which to build future legislation to further control the problem. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. King, you do have a question. Thank you for being here. Chairman Franklin.
I'd like to be recognized to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Not at this time. We still got a couple speakers. Any other questions for Mr. King? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next speaker, I believe, is Andre Johnson.
Good afternoon to the distinguished members of this committee. I won't take up too much of your time. I was for 3 years assistant district attorney, Stone Mountain Judicial Circuit. I am now in private practice and doing some legislative work with the ACLU. You've heard arguments that have been made with regard to this bill before. I'm not going to take up too much of the committee's time. I am concerned. Representative Sesser, I believe, brought up the soccer mom scenario. My concern for the committee to consider with regard to this bill is if someone's license is expired. So you forgot to renew your license or didn't renew it in time and then you get stopped. You're driving without a license. I'm also concerned, obviously, about the fingerprinting. I do understand the aim at wanting to fingerprint individuals. My concern is after the first conviction, and again, I do understand the intent, but given that driving without a license the first time is normally a relatively minor offense, 4 times I do see the author's point, but the first time being able to fingerprint and keep that information raises some obviously privacy concerns that you've heard ACLU representatives make before. So I'll remind the committee of our concerns regarding that. And the last one you've also heard with regard to a potential for racial profiling for people who may look foreign and may be more likely to be pulled over. The capacity for possible abuse and not getting to the intent of what the author, I believe, intended this bill to be, would be some of the concerns that we'd ask the committee to consider this afternoon. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
It was pretty much a comment, but he already left.
Okay. Question or comment, Representative Levitas? Okay. Are you asking to be recognized? Representative Bearden.
Just on clarification, if you get pulled over and your license are expired, you're not driving without a license, you're driving an expired license, which is totally different than what the gentleman pointed out. I just want to make sure that was clear to the committee. Thank you.
Elise Shore.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. I'm here. My name is Elise Shore. I'm regional counsel, as you know, to MALDEF. And we object to this bill for similar reasons to those previously stated. With respect to some of the testimony that's been heard today, we do think that the fingerprinting aspect that's been brought up would renew and resurrect the governor's veto concerns, which were that he feared, and I'm quoting from his message now, we fear unintended consequences of this legislation as drafted would subject persons to, with valid out-of-state driver's licenses, to stout penalties, even absent the commission of a willful act. It's also our position that as previously stated, that this law could lead to profiling and could create distrust between the law enforcement community and the Latino community and other immigrant communities, and will discourage members of these communities from cooperating with the police. With the enhanced penalty, it's our position that this could be seen as giving a green light to increase profiling based on what Mr. Johnson previously testified to, the fact that somebody looks foreign. We have received phone calls where people have been stopped, and there are issues concerning this that have been brought to our attention. With respect to the governor's enunciated concern on unintended consequences, which was part of his veto message last year, we would point to the case of the Canadian-born woman who was stopped, jailed, and strip-searched because the officers there believed that a state law had mandated them to detain all foreign-born persons. So generally, with the enhanced penalty here, it is our position that creates more of could create more of an incentive to lead to profiling. Also, with respect to some other issues regarding how the language of the law, the proposed law, is drawn, as we've brought up in other contexts, we think that this sends an unwelcoming message to our foreign global trade partners with respect to somebody who's here, who is driving with a valid out-of-state driver's license or with a license from a different country, say, for example, a Chinese executive who is here from Kia or from, Kia's from the Korean company, from one of the Chinese companies that has just started building their infrastructure here, that this could create problems with those people as well, and that the bill does not address that issue, and that, again, is an issue of unintended consequences that the governor pointed out last year in his veto, and that is a concern that we have for this proposed bill. And if the committee could just bear with me, there was a lot of testimony given. I think we've noted in the past that if the safety issue is the issue here that's trying to be addressed, which we believe obviously it isn't, because we've already heard testimony with respect to the issue of what's been called, well, what is the immigration issue that people feel is not being dealt with at the federal level, and I think we can all agree that it's not adequately being dealt with there. If the issue is really the public safety, there are other public safety issues of driving, in addition to driving without a license, which upon multiple offenses do not lead to this same result. So if the true issue is public safety, then that might be something to be considered as well. I think speeding would be one of those. And then finally, with respect to the expression of illegal alien, that is not actually used in the federal law. The legal term is unauthorized alien, so that was just a correction of the record. And I think that's all, and I'd be happy to entertain questions from y'all. You've all seen me before, so I'm happy to entertain any questions, and I respectfully thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And just to follow up on the fingerprinting issue, I won't reiterate what Andre Johnson said before me, but it's our position that that does present major privacy concerns, and that would raise the same types of issues of unintended consequences that that were brought up during the veto. And I understand that you all are the policy-making body, and so that's a consideration that y'all have. But it is part of the unintended consequences calculation, and that again, just making Georgia a welcome state for our foreign trade partners, we would ask or we would submit that this is not the message to send through this bill. It's not consistent with that message that Georgia is sending to our global trade partners in other sectors. So I thank you again, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity.
We're always pleased to see you. Thank you very much for being with us.
If you all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Representative Bearden.
Yes, ma'am. Speaking of the concern to our friends from Korea, isn't it true that they could easily go to somewhere in their country to get an international driver's license that's valid for 1 year in this state and in this nation?
I believe there is a pending bill here to recognize an international driver's license.
We recognize them now.
And that may be recognized. However, they could be stopped along the side of the road as well. They look foreign. They do not. As part of the profiling issue, it's possible that that kind of executive could be stopped along the side of the road, doesn't have the driver's license, doesn't have the international driver's license, and there is an issue also of whether they're here for longer than 30 days. Under Georgia law, that person needs to have a driver's license from Georgia, and the previous version of this bill did give the judge discretion to make that determination. Now what has to happen is the person actually has to produce the driver's license.
But under the international pact, I could go to AAA, pay $20 for an international driver's license, valid for a year, go to Korea and drive. Is that not true?
I would have to check on that. I don't know the answer.
It is true. Secondly, I talked to you at one time before. What would be the punishment if I went across the border illegally if I got caught? So if I was driving to Mexico and I was there illegally, I did not have a valid Mexican driver's license, and I caused a wreck, could you tell me what would happen? What would the charges be to me?
I submitted the last time you asked me that question that I did not know the answer, but I would say that that's not the issue before us, and that we don't base our laws, that we hold ourselves out as the model of laws, not looking to other countries as their laws. And I'd be happy to resubmit.
I would be charged with a felony. So just letting you know how we be treated in one area to a way that we're so evil here in the United States, apparently. I just want to make sure that you knew that in this community I'll be charged with a felony there. And that here they get 4 chances before, even if they're from another country or from America or Georgia, without ever getting a license. It would take 4 times before a felony would ever occur. So I appreciate you taking the time and coming before us today.
You were asking questions you knew the answer to.
That's a good lawyer.
And I never was. I'm a police officer.
Never ask the question if you don't know the answer.
Right?
Any other questions?
Yeah, Representative Levitas has a question for you.
May have more than one, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm a little troubled, my first line of questioning, by what I view as sort of inherent contradiction in what you're testifying. And let me preface this all by saying, has Kia or any other manufacturer approached you? I know I haven't been contacted and expressed concern about this bill.
Not this particular bill.
Okay.
No.
And I thought I heard you say that this is not something that's done in other states and that we need to be a model. And on the other hand, I thought I heard you just say in response to Representative Bearden's question that we shouldn't look to other laws of other states
No.
who are the model.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Or
no,
other countries.
I was saying other countries
Okay.
because we hold ourselves out as the model lawmaker for other countries, and we're involved in a number of model sort of activities of our constitutional democracy.
So following that logic, if other countries don't do this, that's not a reason for us not to enact this law. Is that right? Because we shouldn't look to other countries and how they handle it. We should be looking at the merits on its own.
That
okay.
was my argument.
Okay. You also mentioned that this would deter cooperation with law enforcement. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Based on phone calls and experiences that have been relayed to us, when there's this type of law in place, and there's a general sort of atmosphere of intimidation, and people are concerned, and there's been studies done, people become concerned about reporting crimes to the police and cooperating with the police on other issues involving public safety. And we've even had incidences where people have been stopped and they've shown their driver's license. It's a valid Georgia driver's license, and they've been questioned as to its validity on the license itself. So we believe that based on the experiences and the phone calls that we've gotten at our office, that this creates a continuing discouraging sentiment on the part of the community, all the immigrant communities, to cooperate with the police, because it creates an increase, or at least the perception of an increased incentive to stop people driving.
And
Traffic stops, increased traffic stops.
By way of a comment, I certainly hope this would discourage people. It ought to discourage them. But I guess what I'm curious about is what level of cooperation we can expect from somebody who has at least 3 times been caught, not done it, but caught 3 times for driving, never having been licensed, and why we would expect cooperation from them, because clearly they're not cooperating in following our laws since they're driving without being properly licensed. I guess that's a rhetorical question. And the final thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned things like speeding and other offenses, that if we're going to be uniform, we should apply it to those offenses as well. So is your testimony that you would like to see not only this law but other laws have the same application?
Our position is that there are other flaws inherent in this proposed bill, but that if the intent is public safety, then we would submit it's appropriate to look at other public safety risks or public safety concerns if that is the intent of the law.
Well, I certainly, again, don't want to weigh down the bill unnecessarily, but I will take that to heart, and if I'm lucky enough to be returned next year, I'll certainly look at adding this kind of treatment to offenses like speeding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Levitas, Representative Setzler has a question for you, Ms. Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you agree or disagree that the state has an interest in ensuring non-licensed drivers are not on the road?
I would submit that the state has the authority to regulate people who drive in the state of Georgia, but again, this doesn't. The term unlicensed in Georgia is different from unlicensed, and I know we've heard testimony, so I guess I would differ with respect to the terminology. But I would submit that the state of Georgia has, and the legislature has the power to regulate driving in Georgia.
We could probably work together and establish a license in one of the 50 states, state of Georgia, in any subset of international licensing means. We could probably agree that there's a term of licensed driver versus completely unlicensed, unregulated driver. But does the state have an interest in making sure that unlicensed, unaccountable, completely unregulated drivers pose a concern to the state legislature?
I would agree that the state can regulate people who drive with and without licenses.
Thought you would. Would you also agree that the state has an interest to ensure that uninsured drivers are not on our roads?
I would state that you're giving me hard cross-examination questions. I would state that. Pardon me. I would state that. I would state that the that the issue of regulating uninsured drivers driving within the state of Georgia is within the power of the legislature to regulate as well. Some states have that it's not that they require insurance, and some don't, I believe.
So I'm hearing that you would concede that the state of Georgia has an interest that drivers on the road have not only have some level of liability coverage, so if they damage other people, hurt other people, that there's some means of redress, and that the state has an interest in ensuring that there's insurance provisions for folks driving on our roads. Would you agree with that?
This bill does not address that, though.
I'm just
the bill addresses
I ask you a very simple question.
Yes,
Okay,
the bill addresses unlicensed, not uninsured.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, would you agree that the state has an interest to has an interest and has concern if there's current people, if people present in the state are violating state law?
The state has an interest in
Would you agree that local law enforcement agencies also have an interest in folks that are violating current federal law?
That I would disagree with.
Okay. I asked the question because what we have is we have unlicensed, uninsured violators of state and federal law operating on our roads, and by your own words, the state has an interest in doing something about that. And I would submit to you this bill seeks to do that in a systematic, fair-minded way. And I just I thank MALDEF for its concern that we take into account the issue of unlicensed drivers. I thank you for your concern that we take into account the uninsured drivers. And I thank you for your concern that we take into account folks that are violating state law, which the people in question are doing. And consequently, we thank you for your supporting the spirit of this bill. And we can debate what's the best way to get at it. But that's what we're all trying to do here. So I appreciate the question, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Shore.
Thank you very much, Al. I appreciate it.
Okay. That is all those who had signed up on the bill. And let's see, Representative Lunsford.
Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the Chairman of this committee, I'd like to be recognized to propose a motion for an amendment to this legislation at the appropriate time.
This is not the appropriate time for an amendment. Representative Bearden.
At the proper time, I'd like to make a motion to do pass.
The Chair will recognize you for that motion.
Lost the train of thought. I would submit that the committee do pass Senate Bill 350, LC 293034.
All right, we have a motion and a second that Senate Bill 354. 350. Been a long afternoon with you, Chairman Wiles.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I love it down here.
You're not through yet.
I know that, but
Okay.
I spent many a year sitting right where Chairman Franklin is. This was the best years of
your life.
Best years of my time in the minority in the House, I can tell you.
Representative Levitas is wanting to be recognized.
Just for the amendment at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, that's all.
I'll come back to you. All right, we have a motion to give Senate Bill 350 a due pass recommendation. Chair will recognize first Representative Lunsford on, I think you had an amendment you wanted to suggest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do is look at page 2, line 13, and at the end of the word state, put in there, and this is a little bit long, Mr. Chairman, I apologize, I don't have it typed up, but I'll speak very slowly. And it's talking about when their fingerprints have been taken, and would put such fingerprints, whether taken upon conviction or at the time of arrest, shall be forwarded to the Georgia Crime Information Center, where an identification number shall be assigned to the fingerprints for use in detecting any future violations by the same offender. Now, no part of that language in that amendment requires the fingerprinting, but it's saying if they have taken the fingerprints and we spent taxpayers' money to fingerprint them, we may as well identify them with a number and keep them for future events. I can, Mr. Chairman. And Jill had she had asked help me with where to place it, Mr. Chairman, so we could be grammatically correct in there. And so I'll give it back to her.
But I didn't write it down.
She was. This is how you end up. I actually had a constitutional amendment valid on my committee. It came out as an amendment. We got it to the floor yesterday. It said a bill to be entitled. It came out of committee as a constitutional amendment. Had to fix it.
Such fingerprints, whether taken upon conviction or at the time of arrest, shall be forwarded to the Georgia Crime Information Center, where an identification number shall be assigned to the fingerprints for use in detecting any future violations by the same offender.
Yes, sir, Mr.
That
Chairman.
stated accurately?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's your motion to amend?
Yes, sir, it is.
Is there a second? All right. We have a motion to amend. Is that objected to? The author object?
Mr. Chairman, I don't object, but as we have raised our concerns, I would like to, if I get a pushback from the second floor, I'd like to be able to withdraw that consent at the appropriate time. I'm going to immediately deal with that, but and I appreciate, because you're doing what I want to do. I just don't want to kill the bill. If we have to, we deal with the floor amendment or whatever we have to deal with.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to try to rely on the solicitor and the AG's office to try to help persuade the concerned parties that we're moving in the right direction for Georgia, and that would give us a couple of days to try to persuade the concerned parties that we're moving in the right direction. And with permission of this committee, if we reach an impasse, sir, and can't get past it, I have no problem with trying to carry that in the future on a separate endeavor, if it pleases this committee.
I just want to make sure we get, with respect to the governor's office, I'd like to have this on his desk before, so we can have a decision.
Before the end of April?
So we can have
1st of May?
So we can have a decision.
Middle of May?
So we can have a decision within the 6 days within which he is required to either sign or veto the bill before the House and Senate choose to adjourn on whatever date that may be.
I was suggesting scenarios.
I have a law practice to get back to.
I understand. I fully understand. Jill.
Solicitor Spahos has indicated some changes that might improve this. So can I read from GCI?
Absolutely.
Identification number shall be assigned to the defendant for the purpose of detecting any future violations by the same offender. We're not assigning a number to a fingerprint. We're assigning it to the defendant who's been convicted.
That's what I meant to say, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lunsford, do you wish to restate your amendment?
Yes, sir, I do.
And do you wish for it to be exactly as Ms. Travis stated it just now?
I do, sir, rather than have to waste your time reiterating.
Is there objection to that? Hearing none, the Lunsford amendment, which was seconded, has been recast into the language that Ms. Travis just stated. All right. Well, let me do something different. Representative Levitas.
My only question is to counsel and to Prosecutor Spahos is whether we want to use the word person. And I don't know how the language works, but I think person instead of defendant would be my suggestion. Okay, so I did not want to make a substitute motion and steal Representative Lunsford's thunder, but I would request that we make that as use the word person. So perhaps he could recast again a second time his amendment using the word person instead of defendant.
Is there objection? I'm sorry.
If I could, the amendment that Representative Golick asked us to carry, the word Legislative Council used in that one was individual. And what I was just trying to say is if we're going to adopt for want of a better description, the Golick amendment is probably offered by Representative Levitas, we might want to be consistent. His idea was you either have the licensee or the individual, whoever they is, that record gets sent. And
could I recast my motion to recast the Lunsford amendment using the word individual instead of the word?
I would treat you with just as much fairness as I would treat Representative Lunsford.
I'd like more, but I'll take that.
All right. Is there any objection? Now we still only have one amendment, though. The Lunsford amendment is the only amendment on the table now, or actually it's been moved on. It's not on the table. Representative Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I do have another amendment to offer the appropriate time. Just wanted to.
All right, let's
make sure you're aware of that.
let's take them one at a time, and I'll come back to you. Secretary Bearden.
I had a very small amendment. I was going to check with the author on it.
I'll come back to you too. Let's take the Lunsford amendment first of all. Is there any discussion on the? Was there objection to the Lunsford amendment? Let me ask that. Was there objection? Hearing none, it's adopted. Representative Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment, I think, is a friendly one to the author. It's on page 2 of the original bill, line 9. I was going to insert some language. And again, the amendment deals with the issue of a plea of nolo with respect to the fingerprinting and the imprisonment. And I would insert on line 9, after the word obtained, before the word shall, the language, or plea of nolo contendere accepted. So, is accepted. Thank you. So that line 9 would read, or plea of nolo contendere is accepted, comma, shall be fingerprinted and shall be punished by imprisonment for not less than. That would be the Setzler amendment, Mr. Chairman.
There is a second. Okay. Is there objection to the Setzler amendment? Is there objection? Author's okay with it? All right. Hearing no objection, the Setzler amendment is adopted. Secretary Bearden.
This one goes to Jill and the senator. I think on page 1, line 19 and 20, what this is hopefully also help out Hawk Lunsford's scenario. When they are caught on the road, can we make this, how can we make this a fingerprintable offense at that time? So, I mean, just not from who they may be, but they may be wanted somewhere else, and we'd like to capture them fingerprints. As said, a lot of departments, when they take them to jail anyway, they fingerprint them when they do that arrest bookend. And would that be something the senator would? You're shaking your head no. So if I need to pull it, I will.
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I don't know how we do that. I just don't know how to make it in a bill. I think policy of the departments, if they want to arrest somebody for this, obviously they're not arresting them for driving without having a license on none of the person, nor are they arresting them for driving with an expired license, because that's specifically included in line 19 and 20. I just don't know that we could do that, and I would ask that we not do that, because we're actually going to add, if Representative Levitas offers the amendment, some language right there in line 20 based on Representative Golick's request.
So usually just know that if we can't find out who they are driving, we do take them up to the station and get the prints, and we try to find out who they are before we let them go. We don't want a murderer going down the road after we stopped them.
And I understand that, and that's in departments that have the electronic fingerprinting. What I don't want is the departments that still roll the fingerprints and send them to the FBI, and 5 weeks later get back from the FBI that they let them go.
I will respect your wish and not put it in.
Thank you.
Representative Levitas, is your light on from the last time, or is this? Okay. I'll recognize you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would, looking on page 2, does everybody have a copy of the Golick Amendment now, which has LC 34-1386? Because just to save time, I don't want to have to read the whole thing. Y'all hear from me enough. On page 2, lines 12 through 14, the double underline language, I would move that language beginning with the word any and all the way through the end of the period at the end of line 14 be inserted on the bill before us, LC 293034, on line 20 before the quotation mark. So this is page 2 of the Golick Amendment, be inserted on page 1 of Senator Wiles's bill, on line 20 after the period on that sentence. And it's a two-part, and I'll take them as two separate amendments if it pleases the chairman, in case there's discussion on one but not the other.
I have no objection. I've just been communicating with Representative Golick, and he said that he will confirm with the governor's office there and don't have objection. I think he might actually have a more direct line than I do.
I won't comment on that.
Maybe Representative Lunsford needs to talk to him.
I accept that amendment, and it would solicit a second for that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Are you moving a part of the Golick amendment now?
Well, I'm moving. If there's no objection, I just thought I'd move one and then move the other. I can move them both at the same time.
Is there a second?
The chair.
Yes.
All right. Is there an objection to? Is this your second amendment?
This is the first amendment.
No, you did one earlier, didn't you?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was actually restating the Lunsford.
That's
amendment.
right. Okay. All right. This will be Leviticus 1.
That
Is
may
there
do me a
objection to
failure.
Leviticus 1? Hearing no objection, that one is adopted. Go ahead and make your second one.
The second motion, Mr. Chairman, would be on line to create a new section, renumber the existing sections, insert a new section. I'm sorry, to make section 4, the Golick Amendment on page 1, striking the word, not including the word, the number 3, but beginning with the word records, running all the way from line 13 through the end of the page and on to page 2 of LC 34-1386 through line 3. And I would ask that becomes section 4, and that section 4 and 5 of the Wiles bill be renumbered as sections 5 and section 6.
I think
Unless, of course, as I see a squeal from council, we need to do it differently.
You need to do bills chronologically. So this is amending 40-5-2, so it would actually be section 1 of the bill.
And this would be restated motion would be that this becomes section 1 of the bill without the number 3. All other language from 13 through 26 on page 1, page 2 lines 1 through 3 would be section 1.
Why are you trying to get rid of the number 3?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I was thinking this was part of the section. You're absolutely right. Thank you, counsel. That would include from the parentheses 3 all the way through line 3 on page 2 of the Golick Amendment, and add that as section 1 and renumber all other sections accordingly.
I'm almost fearful to ask this question. Does everyone understand Leviticus 2?
I hope
Which
you're not
did get a
asking me that
second
question.
from somebody. Does everyone understand? Is there objection?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question of Legislative Council before
Sure.
I say, do we need lines 9 through 12 of the Golick, of page 1 of
Mr.
Golick?
Spejo says we do.
May I restate for
Got
a
a
second time?
Thank you, Mr.
Consensus.
I would
Leviticus 2 as amended.
as amended or restated, which would be include from lines 9 through 26 on page 1 and inclusive of lines 1 through 3 on page 2.
All right.
Yes, that would.
No, because we've already got section 1 in the bill, so that's on line 11 of the bill. We'd be inserting that beginning on line 12 and renumbering the section so that you have sections 2, 3, 4, and 5 would become sections 3, 4, 5, and 6.
The chair will not recognize you for that request. Okay. Are we all clean on that now, Jill? Okay. Leviticus 2 as amended, corrected, and revised. Is there objection? And seconded. Is there objection? Hearing none, that amendment is adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a substantive question, if this is appropriate time to ask.
Sure.
About the base bill. To the author, page 2, line 20.
Yes.
I personally have a concern with fourth or subsequent conviction within 5 years. I would submit that a fourth or subsequent conviction in 10 years would seem to be more appropriate. What it does is it broadens. 4 convictions in 5 years narrows the scope. 4 convictions in 10 years means if over the course of 8 years there were 4 of these convictions, then a person would fall into the provisions of this bill. Again, I know there's a delicate balance you're trying to maintain. I'd like the author's thoughts on that.
This was language that was, I think the 5 years was in my original bill. It was the third offense, and I believe the Speaker of the House objected and wanted it to go to 4th and 5 years. And considering I still have to get past him, I would respectfully request of the person who can vote for me, but I can't vote for him, to not offer that amendment.
I think that shows great wisdom on your part.
Mr. Chairman, I just share that. I think as public policy that would be a better step, but again, if that moves the overall effort back, I would not offer that as.
My recollection is pretty much on all fours with that of Senator Wiles. Representative Bearden?
At the proper time, I recognize for a motion.
We have a motion.
Oh, okay. I was going to go ask. I'm sorry. It's been so. It's all been changed. I was going to go with a committee sub, I guess. I don't know.
As amended. Okay. Is there further discussion on the motion to give Senate Bill 350 a due pass recommendation by committee sub as amended? Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising your right hands. Yeah, I'm sure. All opposed, raise your right hands. That has passed. Senator Wiles, it's been a pleasure having you here. I hope you've had as much fun as we have.
Mr. Chairman, I truly have, but I'm not going to have nearly as much fun as Representative Bearden is presenting this bill. It's going to be
We're going to sit down and discuss this.
We're going to.
Before,
I will note my watch did stop. It just gave up the ghost today, so time stood still.
Time
for me here.
stood still.
I'm going to have
members of the committee, before everybody jumps up, we are meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. No, I'm not making it at 11. No, 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. tomorrow. We've got 4 bills on the agenda for tomorrow. We will not meet on Friday. You can count on no Friday. All right, meeting's adjourned.